Today, we're going back in time. To a time when online poker was still living very well off of its boom, when full tilt poker was still there. No, I'm not crying, you're crying. And when an unknown player named Isildur came out of nowhere battling the best players in the world at the highest stakes possible, sometimes even simultaneously. Probably the most epic of these battles was against durrrr, Tom Dwan, who at that time was known as maybe the most aggressive player and the king of no limit hold'em. Isildur surely knew how to challenge that. Yes, it was wild. But how good were these guys actually compared to today's level of play? Years before the first solver became public, you had to figure stuff out for yourself and couldn't just ask the Almighty for a solution. So in hindsight, how close to GTO did they actually get? In this hand, 200 big blinds deep, Isildur 3-bets queens and Dwan calls king 5 suited. Both plays are standard for heads up. On the 9 high suited flop, Isildur goes for a 60-ish% pot bet, which is definitely not a bad sizing, but the solver would prefer a bigger one. On a dynamic board like this, it is more profitable to put in a lot of money early when you have a good but somewhat vulnerable hand like queens without a club. Almost every flush draw is just a call. And bing! Dwan sees the best possible card on the turn. Not so much for queens, which check, as should practically Isildur's entire range. Dwan of course wants to bet, and he actually nails the sizing with the 2/3 pot bet. This is the solver's preferred sizing even if we give it 7 options to choose from. Isildur on the other hand, would be inclined to fold his queens without a club. Even though it has been a pretty hand so far, it doesn't perform well against Dwan's betting range on this turn, which includes a bunch of hands that have him drawing dead already or drawing to 2 outs. And even his bluffs have great equity. He does call, however, and this happens. Looks crazy? Well, it is a thing. Just not for this hand. Or not for this sizing. Queens without a club can sometimes go for a dunk bet, but only for a small sizing, a block bet. This is a bluff, as no worse hand would call, but some better hands would fold according to the sim, and we also prevent worse hands from bluffing us. It's just that block bets didn't really exist back then. Almost nobody ever bet small, so the concept of a block bet wasn't really accessible. What Isildur did notice though, is that this specific river does bring a significant shift to the board. Now, a lot of hands he could likely have played this way, such as aces, 9s, 9-8, or even kings with a club, improved significantly. And since Dwan's range consists of so many medium flushes, which might just choose to check behind on the 4th club in the board pairing, Isildur has incentive to just donk bet his nuttish hands himself. And he probably figured that queens are one of the few hands he would check call the turn with that are now worth almost nothing. So why not turn them into a bluff and represent one of these nuttish hands? So the thought process behind the play is really profound. It's just the hand selection that could be optimized a lot. The solver would prefer pairs as a bluff to at least block in positions full houses. But that's a hard thing to know when solvers are not yet existing. Well, I'm sorry Tom, but that GTO award? We're gonna need that back. In this hand, Isildur opens queen jack off and Dwan calls with 6-7 suited. Both plays are fine, even though 6-7 suited would mostly choose to 3-bet in the simulation. On the jack high flop, Isildur c-bets 5k into 6, and again we see a noticeable difference to today's games in the bet sizing. As said, small sizings basically didn't exist, especially not for c-bets. While nowadays c-betting 1/3 is standard, it was 2/3 or 3/4 back then. Same goes for preflop. Today we see opens of 2.5x at max, sometimes even 2.2x or a 2x. Back then it was basically 3x all the time. So even though it's not a big mistake to bet big on jack 4-2 suited, the solver really doesn't like it. And on other flops such as paired ones, it does actually make a difference. So let's adjust the sim to only use this big sizing on the flop. The overall betting frequency goes down and Queen Jack mixes bets and checks. Durrrr check calls his flush draw, which is totally fine. The turn is a queen and Isildur understandably barrels. Again he goes for this close to pot sizing, which is the solver's only choice if only given the smaller option. However, in today's games, we would expect a good player to recognize that this is a great spot to overbet, which is also the solver's sizing for this combo if given the choice. The board is dynamic again, including 2 flush draws, and the in-position player has another advantage. So just like in the hand before, he wants to leverage this advantage by putting in as much money as possible now, while the board is still in his favor. Back then, overbetting didn't really exist. In fact, Isildur was actually the first player who regularly used overbets that were non-all-ins, but he only really used them on the river if I recall correctly. Now, even against the non-overbet, 6-7 of hearts is just a fold. However, the meta especially in this battle was pretty much that you don't fold a flush draw. And since you can't really check call 7 high on the turn, you gotta raise. Which is better than check calling according to the sim, but still losing 1 big blind on average. Against the raise, Isildur would be mostly calling his range, but Queen Jack is actually one of the hands that could go for a jam, avoiding half a deck full of ugly rivers and getting it in against lower 2 pairs and some pairs plus flush draws, while also protecting equity against pure flush draws would be quite a benefit for strong hands like top 2 and sets. He only calls and does see one of those ugly rivers. For Dwan, 6-7 of hearts is just a give up, and we see that the solver is actually bluffing with no missed flush draw at all. As we block our opponent's folds, which are flush draws as well, we rather choose other combos to put our remaining stack in as a bluff. Hands like 5-3 of spades or clubs, or some Jack-X combos that are mixed in as check raises on the turn, make for better bluffs on the river as they unblock villain's folding range and or even block his calling range. These hands might be difficult to find though, and that is one of the main benefits that a solver can bring. As with Isildur in the hand before, the thought process behind check raising 6-7 on the turn and bluffing it on the river does make a lot of sense. After all, you make sure you do have bluffs when you jam the river, and are not only jamming your rivered flushes and full houses, but with the help of a solver, we can find strategies that use hand combinations which improve our overall likelihood of success when bluffing, and thus increasing our win rate. Back then, finding these correlations on your own was close to impossible. But one thing they were always capable of: calling down 6-figure bets. Now, if you want to see today's version of the aggro and bosses battle, this video will be exactly for you.